This is right?
Yep.
Recording. All right. So good morning, everybody. Welcome to the TST meeting. Today, I don't really have any other topic other than discussion of the GUI2 and what should we do about it with respect to the upcoming Raven release. Originally, the plan was to leave it as an alternate, but I think there's some good arguments to be made for why we should expedite and promote it to be the default UI, and of course still leave the legacy UI as an optionally loadable component. That for those that have applications that currently build on it, they haven't reworked the APIs and things like that.
I didn't think about that.
Sean, so I'll hand it over to Sean. Sean, do you want to kind of walk us through that in more detail?
Yeah, can you hear me? I think the background noise is coming from me. I'm in a particularly noisy room, but hopefully you can hear me okay.
Yes, we can hear you fine.
Yeah, okay. So let me see. So like as you said, Thomas, there's an option to keep the new re-engineered GUI as a backup option or as a secondary option, but you know, like I said, there's also there's the possibility of making it the primary option as well. And in the slides that I prepared for the Raven release yesterday, I just put forward some of those points. I can share them. Is it possible to share with this GoToMeeting?
Absolutely, yeah. Here, let me make you a presenter.
Okay. Yeah, I'm not familiar exactly with how it works.
Or if you want, I can probably find them and share them. Oh, there we go. You see it.
Yeah. Okay, so yeah, these were the slides that I put together yesterday, and really, you know, it's just I progressed on the topology view from where I was in January, just to implement a lot of these things, you know, minor things really, you know, but just saving preferences, having fixed node positions, background maps, you know, dynamic updates when the node is added and so on, like this, external glyphs, like we saw David had the need for there last month, and then, you know, I added in a grid view as well. I thought it was just an interesting view. It's not something I'm tied to, but you know, this was just an example of you know, the functionality that's in it. And really, I suppose the questions I was raising is like, you know, is it ready to replace the legacy GUI in 2.1? I know you and I, Thomas, had discussed it informally on Slack a while back, and really, you know, once the 2.1 release was coming up, I guess it was time. I thought it was time to consider it. So I think the advantages of it are that it reduces the burden of supporting the old GUI, and really, by my point there, allows people to innovate. Is that, you know, it's the modern framework for building GUI technologies on top of Angular, and you know, if people want to build a GUI, it presents them you know, an up-to-date framework on which to do it. And also, we had discussed previously about ONOS would probably use it as a primary option. You know, so I guess the idea was that you know, if you brought it into 2.1 now, any GUI developed on 2.1, you know, would have the means and the technology to be reusable in ONOS. And of course, in all of this, like, the legacy GUI is still a loadable option, you know. So it's like you access it at a different URL than the newer version of the GUI. So, you know, there are still things to do on it. You know, like there's like the regions and sub-regions, things that were in Topo 2. You know, and breadcrumbs and all that kind of stuff, and then, you know, that sort of layers being packet and optical and that kind of stuff, and also there are minor things like the theme switching, between dark and bright. That kind of stuff is not in there yet. But really, I just wanted to gauge people's appetite for GUI 2. Do people think it's ready? Do people think it's a good thing to go ahead with it? Or are people happy with it to stay as an alternate option? And really, that's the question I have for the TST today, I think.
Right, so let me ask a few clarifying questions. So when you said to keep it load as a loadable option, so basically, so you intend, okay, so maybe I misunderstood. I envision that we would effectively strip the code away, or that we would make it available as an application that would actually not be loaded and run by default. But based on what you just described, it seems like we would just leave it in place. We would just change the URL so that the URL, the current URL would be repurposed for directing to the new UI. Is that
I'm not overly strong on either option, Thomas. I think it's whatever people think is the best option. As I think it can work with both GUIs active. I think it can work with either the new one or either the old one active. What I do today to enable the new GUI is I just go feature install ONOS GUI 2, and at the same time I go feature uninstall ONOS GUI. So it's really that simple. If you uninstall the feature, all of that code is unloaded, and it doesn't exist at the URL. Now there is, I think there is a default. There is a kind of a welcome page in ONOS that's bringing you to ONOS/UI. If you type any URL longer than that, then it will bring you to the old GUI. And I think I would, if we were making GUI 2 the default option, we would have to change that welcome page that brings you to that to that kind of default mapping, if you know what I mean.
Right. So, okay. So I certainly don't have any objections to this at all. Clearly, the downside is we would have to make sure we document this well, so that to kind of minimize the downside, which is that people anticipating the old behavior, having potentially applications that build on the old UI, would now have to take some additional steps. Either they would have to use a different URL, and that's if we were to keep the old UI running in parallel with the new one. Yeah. Or they would have to explicitly activate the old UI if we decide to keep it as an optionally loadable entity.
Yeah. On the subject of documentation, at the moment I don't have anything there on the Maven archetype, where you go off and you create a new application and you can have a GUI element to it. So currently I don't really actually have a mechanism around extending it like that, so that's something that would need to be addressed, I think, in the next few months. So you're right, documentation is one part of it. And like you said, in
from a standpoint, more from a deployer standpoint, to make sure that they have that they know what to do in order to bring back the old world if they desire so.
Yeah, so I would argue that unless you made this the default UI, most people will never know about it, right? Most people aren't going to install the new GUI and go to it. They're just going to start ONOS and go to whatever GUI I get by default. So unless we make it the default, no one's going to really notice, to be honest. The other issue is all the documentation currently in the wiki and everywhere else that shows UI snapshots shows the old UI. So if we're going to make this the default, that means a lot of documentation needs to be updated for new screenshots, particularly if the menu items have changed in terms of location or wording. People are going to get confused. So that's another issue that needs to be considered.
So David, actually, I think visually from a user standpoint, not much has changed. As a matter of fact, I think it could be argued that less has changed between the UI1 and UI2 than what has changed in when we restyled the old UI. And the wiki, it still has snapshots from the UI that's prior to restyling. So I'm not trying to diminish that. We definitely need to go and sweep and update the wiki, probably actually prune the wiki, for sure. I think with respect to the visual delta between what we're talking about now is actually less than what we've undertaken before.
Oh, that's excellent, actually. That's great.
Yeah, yeah, most of let me just, one more thing, and I'll let you. What I think Sean is talking about, having collateral for programmers, and how do I go about adding an overlay, how do I go about adding a table view or things like that. Today we have that codified in the Maven archetypes for the old UI, but anything like that for the new UI, which I think is okay, because presumably it will be much easier also using the TypeScript and more object-oriented method than the old one. And the reason I can confidently say that I've just done recently extension of the UI to support the ON.Lab demo, just as a side project, and yeah, that reminded me how much voodoo there is.
Yep, no, that's good. That's good.
If I can make a suggestion, I would go about keeping them in place for our release, in the sense that maybe we release 2.1 with both of them, either changing the URL or making an application or something like that. So because, for example, the packet optical, for me, it's kind of useful. So if it's not there in the GUI 2, I can still load the GUI 1 and have that. And also let people find, let's say, a problem. I don't expect many, but people find a problem. If they have it, they just change to GUI 1, see how it is, and report it. So we, Sean, us, and everybody else can put it in GUI 2, and then at some point in the 2.2 release, remove the code entirely.
Yeah, so...
Okay.
Well, yeah. So for sure, I don't think the question is at all whether the old one should be available. It needs to be available, and potentially even maybe for even more than one release.
Sure.
Right. But I definitely do agree with Sean that I think it's ready feature-wise, and some of the to-do list items are really secondary and they can be added later, and some of them could be argued are not there really at all. Actually, we don't have breadcrumbs, we don't have regions, because the Topology 2 stuff was never really finalized, and I think it's probably in much better shape than it ever was.
Yeah.
So to me, the question is more, how do we go about making it available?
Yeah.
So I'm personally leaning towards, to minimize the runtime footprint, I'm leaning towards making both of these, both UIs as applications. So the UI2 is almost there in the sense that it's loadable as a separate feature. UI1 is actually loadable as a core feature, but it could be made as an optional feature. See, we package them as application, and then maybe have the default, just like we have the default drivers. If you don't specify which apps are to be loaded, it would load drivers. Well, so we would change it to load the drivers and the GUI too. And then if people wanted to override it, they could simply specify the UI1. Right. And then from that point onward, it's all just either old world or new world. But we don't have to have both worlds at the same time. I'm kind of reluctant to have both running at the same time.
So, yeah, I think the problem is going to be is when I write an app, do I have to have it work with one GUI, both GUIs? This becomes a problem, right? Are we going to have some apps that say, I don't know, take Chord, for example. Oh, the OLT app works with the old GUI, but the, I don't know, VTN app, segment routing, only works with the new GUI.
So
what happens?
Are you proposing not making the other one as an app at all? To me, this was just a suggestion as allowing a choice, the default choice being GUI 2, that is really only transitional or choice for maybe one or two releases until we decide to completely.
I actually agree with the GUIs being applications. Absolutely agree with that. But as you were talking, it came, and you mentioned that you could run one or the other. It came to me that, does this mean when I'm writing an application and it has a GUI component,
yes.
Even something as simple as custom glyphs do I now have to implement that for one driver, both drivers, or both GUIs? Sorry.
So for custom glyphs, David, I think there wouldn't be any dependency on GUI 1 app as an app or GUI 2 as an app. I think, this is something that, your app itself will just expose and implement. And then I think, as GUI 1 starts up, it can access your glyph, and the same with GUI 2. At least I think that's the most
I
that's a
was
workable
using,
solution.
I was using glyphs as an example, but I mean, are there other issues that now, when I write an application, I have to, if I'm putting a new view or a new table out there,
Yes.
I have to be very explicit about it. Am I building this for GUI 1 or GUI 2? And now we're going to have a situation where a user has to not only know what apps he wants, but also what UI it runs against.
So I think
being just another app, right? So just like you need certain apps, you will need certain version of the UI as a temporary transitional choice. For sure.
But if I have two applications I need, and they both use, and one uses UI 1 and one uses UI 2, right? What happens?
You would load both apps.
And both UIs, and I'd have to know which UI to go to access the features of which app.
That's the messy stuff, right? And the reason we offer this transitional period is to offer some time, some window of time for applications to port their views to the new UI, right? This has directionality to it.
Yep.
So while I agree that it's not necessarily the most straightforward thing, and there might be potential for some of these awkward situations that you described, but clearly that's kind of in a delivery of a particular solution. There needs to be some coordination to make sure that they both land on the same UI.
Can we provide automation around at least notification of owners of applications, or those who made the last commit into an application, that, hey, you've got a dependency on GUI old, and we have now scheduled that to be at some point removed, and we expect your application to be updated before such and such a date, that type of thing, so that we can send out nag emails to ensure that applications update?
Right. Yeah, so that's a good point. It might be interesting to see if you can do that. Now, Java-wise, we're not really changing the UI, right? The UI is the same on the Java side. Correct, Sean?
That's correct.
Right. So really, this is just changes on in the JavaScript or TypeScript or HTML structure. So we would have to kind of identify using some sort of a fingerprint in some of those client-side files to determine whether they're using old or new, and maybe during build issue a notification or potentially even just scan that. But the problem is there could be applications of our repo that we will never see, right? So I'm not sure. I think best would
it could be even use the application list, right? We go through the application list and mark every application as only works in UI 2, and then UI 1, and then it's up to the owner or person responsible for that application to verify that it works under UI 2 and change it so it's now marked as worked under UI 2. And then we just go through that list, and anybody who hasn't updated that list gets a nag email. Right?
So
we don't even have a fingerprint. We assume it doesn't work with UI 2 until the owner tells us it does.
Yeah, there are only probably 4 or 5 apps in total, I think, that have a dependency on the GUI. And they would be ones where people have built them and added some kind of, maybe it would have like a .js file in the app. I think there's probably only 4 or 5. So yeah, that's a pretty small set, and I think it's probably feasible to test those and make that dependency in their Bazel file or something like this. Depends on app 1, and then it would load app 1 once you load that particular app. VTN is it? I think is one in particular that has a GUI component to it.
Probably.
I can't remember exactly.
I didn't
but
think Ford was even using VTN anymore.
Yeah, so I mean, Card, in fact, I think doesn't use any of the UI aspects of ONOS in any case. So for something like Card, I think if Card was an app, or if Card was using this, I think both applications might be disabled, both GUI 1 and GUI 2.
Right, exactly, yeah. Which is one reason.
So, okay, yeah, I mean, so Thomas, I think that probably what I should do then is look into making these both these GUI bundles into applications. It's not something I've done before, but that would seem to be a starting point for this at least, and see if they can be loaded in and out just like you described.
Yeah, that should not be terribly difficult, I think. Mostly just probably changes to the build file to
Cool.
make them as apps, and then making changes to the core features file to not to include the GUI as one of the core features.
Sure. Okay.
The core apps are also built off-world and have hard-coded dependencies to specific ONOS versions. So those are not even an issue until Cord updates to 2.x, which is not going to be soon. So I think that's something we can just say by that point, hey, you're going to have to port your apps if they do.
Yeah, and then most likely they'll be moving to an LTS, right?
Yeah, they'll probably move to
15 first, yeah. And then,
so I think Cord is kind of way down the road. I don't think we have to worry about that so much. The one I'm more concerned with is the Sona stuff. They have very fancy UIs that they've written, and I don't know enough about what the porting process is to know. What we might want to do is just shoot Jean an email and say, hey, this is what's happening, and maybe just get some feedback from him about what he thinks we should do. Like, I don't want to screw those guys.
well, no, for sure, but I think we're not really talking about screwing anybody, right? What we're talking about at worst is just one additional step of identifying which UI you want as part of a deployment. And there's many steps in part of the deployment, right? Generally, when you build a deployment, you also specify which apps you want to make part of the deployment. And so this would be just one additional.
So if you were deploying Sona, you would just go with the old UI and not even think.
Yeah, so they could just go with the old UI if they wanted to until they've done the porting. Now, of course, I still would like to encourage people to.
Oh yeah.
I want to deprecate the old stuff as quickly.
Yeah, I'm tired of building it.
Well, right, and right. So that's one, one that's one that.
One of the most expensive things in there.
Right, and so we definitely want to encourage them still to move forward, but
Okay.
Sorry, who was it? Who was it you said is building UI components?
It's the Sona project at SK Telecom, right?
Telecom, yeah.
Jean-Louis, J-I-N-L-I, I think is his last name.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I saw
Lead
his
for that.
Yeah.
So maybe you could just, Slack him. He's on Slack all the time. So if you could just Slack him and just say, hey, this is going on, he might have some useful feedback for us.
Cool. Yeah. No, I was trying to figure out who actually has built components, and I was talking to Laszlo and you, David, I think, and there's a few other people have built components. I know there's a Georgios. Andrea, did you know Georgios? I can't remember. He's with some Swedish organization, but anyway, yeah. So it would have an impact for those people, and that's what we have to try and minimize.
What about the guy who did the packet forwarding app? Does he have a UI for it? I can't remember his name now. He gave a talk at the TST a few.
Oh, Adib.
Adib, yes.
I'm not.
Does he have a UI, or is his just?
I don't think so. I think he's just using it.
Okay, then he's fine. He's another one I know of who's doing off-world apps.
Yeah.
Why don't we make this a plan then? So let's convert these things into applications, and we can, either Ray or I can probably help with that.
Mm-hmm.
They should at least guide you through this. Then let's aim for making basically, and I can change the default loading mechanism, kind of installation scripts, because right now the ONOS apps, which is the environment variable to indicate which apps should be loaded by default, defaults to the drivers, the default drivers. And so we would extend that mechanism to also default to the
Yep.
UI 2, and could be overridden for UI 1.
Okay. I'll also give, I don't know what level of testing is currently going on for 2.1, but I'll give QA a heads up and just say, hey, you know, we're going to be switching a lot of plumbing under the covers.
Right.
Keep an eye out.
My suggestion would be to make both UIs land on the same URL. So that way, externally, you know, you just go to ONOS UI. I would also suggest when we give the applications names, we will name the GUI 2 as just a GUI.
Yeah.
So if they land on the same URL, what happens if I load both?
Yeah, that's a good point. That's a good point.
Yeah, but I don't know if that's really a valid use case to be landing on, or to want to load both at the same time. Is it? I know there's the situation you described where you have, you know, something on one and something on two, but realistically, that's a lot of jumping around. I don't think anybody wants to do that at a front end.
I agree. There's a lot of jumping around.
And then,
the other, go ahead. I have another question before we move off this topic in general, but I want you guys to finish first.
Yeah. Please go, David.
No, I think you need to complete your thoughts because mine's kind of a tangent, so I don't want to.
I see. Well, so my thought was, okay, when we split it to separate applications, let's also name them appropriately to kind of abandon this GUI 2 and just make it a GUI and maybe a legacy GUI or whatever. So to kind of be explicit about what these things are in application ID.
Sure.
And then let's go for that, right? Let's see if we can do this by the feature freeze, which is April 5th. So that leaves us, what, about 3 weeks to do this?
Yeah.
Something like that, maybe 3 now. So let's aim for that. I mean, there could be a little bit of a fluff in there. That's fine. Let's make that the plan. And then we should probably also think about doing some, at least some markdown or some wiki documentation for the steps to enable the old UI to make it very visible, and so we can also potentially send an email announcing this change on a mailing list as soon as possible. Okay. I wouldn't send it yet, maybe, but I would send it as soon as we kind of figure out how to make them the two apps and what the steps are.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's right.
I think I'm done with my thoughts. So if David, you wanted to.
Before you start, David, I just wanted to remind everybody that week of April 5th is ONS.
Yes.
So I don't know how much is going to be happening here at the lab. Yeah. Anyway, go ahead. Thanks.
So I like the annotations on the right here. You know, alarm view, external application, possibly all the other applications could be external as well. That's great. Question is, when I say an external application, does that mean an external ONOS application, or does that mean an external process? And when some of these applications do become an external process, is the UI2, whatever we want to call it, taking that into consideration that it might be talking to a different back end to get the data to fill that, and or it might actually dynamically download the required view from the application when the application somehow connects to the GUI.
So I don't think we've thought that far ahead.
Okay.
Really, you know, I think what this is talking about is really on the JavaScript side only. You know, that previously, you know, this was a big kind of monolithic, you know, bunch of JavaScript files and HTML and all that kind of stuff. And really what I was doing here is really separating them out. Separating them out at the Java backend, I think, is another stage. And I think that's probably something that would be feasible in the ONOS NG kind of time frame. Here, it's probably not a big priority.
Okay, thank you.
Right there, Thomas.
Oh yeah, that makes sense to me. Because I mean, we do want to reuse this for the next gen, and so clearly we will have to tackle with the topic that you brought up, David, right?
Yep.
Yeah, and sorry, I was just going to say, like, you know, currently, you know, the interface between the Java front end or the JavaScript front end and the back end is like defined in WebSockets, but they're kind of you know, it's a black box, and you know, I think maybe if they were defined in X-Proto or sorry, in Proto, buffs or maybe gRPC, you know, we could get a better insight into like what are the messages moving back and forth, and then you could start to disaggregate the back end, the Java side of it. Then, you know, once you had a clear picture of what the dependencies were.
Yeah. So we'll have to figure out how we do that, right? Yeah, we could either have the client itself talk to multiple different backends, or potentially have the client still talk to a single backend, but that backend can potentially be extended with, you know, with effectively UI-oriented data sources that would be acting as a proxy to the authoritative data source.
Mm-hmm.
Aggregate the information for the point of UI, and this is still a choice to be made and decided.
Yep. All right.
Okay.
But I think just even modularizing the front end will be very useful, because that'll set a pattern, a nice pattern for the next generation stuff to be very, very modular.
Very good. Okay, that's all I had on it. So great discussion, and I'll go ahead and I'll work on making those into loadable applications in ONOS then.
Yep. And don't hesitate to lean on myself or Ray. I should be able to help you with that. Mostly,
That's
I
super.
expect to be adding the ONOS app macro inside the build files for both, and then extracting the UI from the core features.
Yeah. Very good.
All right. Now it's only 9:36 right now. We still have you know, 20 minutes left or so. Is there any other topics that people would like to cover? If not, then we can probably just call the meeting done, and plan to reconvene in 2 weeks. Next week I will be in Philadelphia, so I won't be able to attend, but if there is need for the TST meeting, it can still take place, just without me this time. Yep. All right. So have a great day, everybody. That was a good meeting. Talk to you later.
Okay, bye, everybody.
Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.